What is cracking? It is your girl, Lillian Francis. I'm a music producer and educator, and it is my goal to make learning music production as chill and fun as possible, so welcome. If you're watching this video, it's probably because you want to have full creative control to take your song and mix it so that it sounds clean and clear and beautiful and powerful and polished and buzzwords that doesn't sound like it was mixed in your parents' basement. So you can finally release your music and feel confident that it sounds really fucking good. And if you're like any other person in the entire world who has learned how to mix, you're a little bit overwhelmed by all the different tools that we have and all the different things that you're supposed to do, and like the EQ and the compression and this and that, and it can get really overwhelming. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're like, oh my God, mixing, there's so much to remember, there's so much to do, how do you approach it? This is the first video you need to watch. What I'm about to teach you here is going to help you visualize the sounds in your space and then use the actual tools we need to get our desired result. It's all about identifying where sound goes and then using your tool to put it there. And it's really not that hard when you break it down, and we're going to break it down. So let's go. So what is mixing exactly? Mixing is getting every single sound in your song to sound as good as possible together. We only have a certain amount of sonic space, so we need to be really intentional about where we're putting each one of our sounds. There are 8 different dimensions we can use to place a sound in space. We can place it to the left, or we can place it to the right. We can place it narrow, or we could spread it out wide. We can place it up top, we can place it down low, we can place it in front, and we can place it in back. So what are the tools that we as producers use to place these sounds in the different spaces? I'm glad you asked, because I love talking about it. All right, first things first, left and right. This is our pan pots. Any DAW is gonna have the ability to move a sound left or right with the pan pots in the track mixer. And as a rule of thumb, we generally keep our most important sounds down the middle. So like vocals, snare, kick, bass, these are all things that you're gonna find down the center. And the more auxiliary sounds are gonna be pushed out to the sides. And these sounds don't have to just stay left or right, right? We can automate them to go back and forth, or we can throw on an auto pan that will automate them to go back and forth at the rate that we want. Next, we can make sounds narrow and wide. So a narrow sound is going to be a mono sound. And what that means is the sound has the exact same signal on the left as it does on the right. And our brain puts this together as the sound being right down the middle. Now, when there's a slight differentiation in the left and right channels, we perceive the sound to be stereo. There are lots of different ways that we can slightly change our left and our right signal in order to create a stereo spread. A Haas delay is a delay in which one side of the signal, either the left or the right, is delayed just slightly, under 40 milliseconds. And these signals, when they hit our brain at slightly different times, our brain perceives the sound to be wide. Other stereo widening tools are chorus ensemble, phaser, flanger, frequency shifter, etc. So think about why we might want to place some sounds as being narrow and some as wide. So bass, for example, is something that we'd want to keep mono, at least for our lower frequencies. Bass frequencies can eat up a lot of space. They use a lot of energy. So keeping the bass mono limits the amount of space that it's using. Also, bass frequencies can be really sensitive to phasing issues, and spreading sounds out wider can create phasing issues. When we have phasing issues, you can easily lose your punch and definition, so we keep them in mono. Something like the kick, you'll probably also keep in mono because it gives us like a center to our sound. We want it just like hidden in the middle, you know? We don't want it like taking up the entire space of the sound. But something that we might want to be spread out would be like a pad, or like the reverb from our vocals, push them out to the side, things like this. The accessory sounds are more the ones that get pushed out to the outside, whereas the very critical, most important pieces of our song, we keep focused down the middle. However, you can totally keep something focused down the middle and also spread out in the background. For example, vocals. I will always keep my main vocal down the center in mono, but then we can take this lead vocal and send it to a return channel with a Haas delay on it, and that Haas delay can be spreading out my vocals to the side. So by using parallel processing, I'm keeping my vocal in the front and center, being the star of the show, and also make my vocal bigger and wider by adding a Haas delay that's gonna fill in the background and make my vocals big. So yeah, narrow, wide. Decide what you want your sound to be and then use the tools to get there. Next, we have up or down. And what determines whether a sound sounds high or low in our mix? Frequency. That's right, fam. Higher frequencies are gonna sound like they are higher up in the mix. If you think about like a bird whistling, it's up in the trees, it's up in the skies, it's above us. And then our lower frequencies, we're going to perceive as being down lower. So think about like the bass, the rumble of the bass, it's coming from the ground, you know? So we can make space for different sounds in our mix by placing them in different frequency ranges. Now we can do that by being conscious of what sounds are playing at the same time, right? If we have two guitars that are competing against each other, maybe transpose one up or transpose one down, but then maybe that one's competing with the bass. So that's when maybe an EQ would come in handy. And an EQ allows us to carve out spaces in the frequencies so that everybody can live in its own little frequency space. So that's one of the ways that you would get a kick and a bass to sound good together, is either taking some of the kick frequency out of the bass or taking some of the bass frequencies out of the kick, or doing both and letting your kick and your bass live in different frequency zones. And last but certainly not least, we have up front and in back. And the way that we make something sound up front or in back is volume. Yeah, volume. It's kind of obvious, but when something's up front, it's louder. And when something's in back, it's quieter. And we can use that to our advantage to draw attention to certain aspects and not another. So your vocals, for example, are going to be one of the loudest sounds in your track. And that little effect that like doesn't do a lot, but is fun to have in there, is going to be a little bit further back because you don't want it to steal the thunder of your vocal. So let's think about like a saturator. When we add a saturator onto something, one, it's going to increase the harmonics. So we're going to have higher harmonic content, and therefore the sound is going to rise in the stereo field, right? Higher frequencies go higher up. And then also if we are adding volume with that saturator, it's also going to come forward. So that's why something like a saturator is really important for bringing things up front in the mix. Now, there are a couple of other effects that do add depth to our field. So they push something back in the mix. And that would be time-based delays like reverb and echo or delay. If you think about delay, the sound is getting smaller and therefore it sounds like it's going further back. That's like how delay works. And reverb does a similar thing, right? It's going to push a sound back in a space. We can also use these tools to make something seem up front and in the back at the same time. So let's go back to the vocal example. Let's say I send my vocals to a return track with reverb on it. I still get my vocals to be up front and dry, but I also have this return track that is creating a reverbed version and sending it out all around me. So not only am I up front, I'm also in back. So why is all this important? Well, hopefully you kind of get it by now, but basically, if we can go through all of our sounds and identify where we want them, left or right, narrow or wide, up or down, up front or in back, then we can reach for the right tools to actually put that sound in that place. So I hope this visualization, this conceptualization of mixing has been helpful. And if you are someone who is just getting into mixing, I want to cheer you on and say that it gets better. I totally remember sucking at mixing and I did it anyways and I kept doing it anyways. And like all things, the more you do it, the better you get. You cannot get worse by practicing. So start mixing with your own music because you want to be a bad mixer when you have not very good songs to work with. And then as your songs get better, you get better. And then by the time you're a really good producer, you're also a really good mixer. And if you don't mix with yourself as you get better, then who is gonna let you mix their songs? No one. And then you don't get to practice. So mix on yourself because it's the free way to learn. Well, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If there's something that stood out to you, any aha moments, any brain blasts that happened, I would love to hear about them. I love hearing what sticks with you guys and knowing what I should focus on next. So if you enjoyed this video, comment, like, subscribe, you know the deal. Anyways, I just hope you learned something. Bye.